Ruth barged into the Gateman's bathroom. Musa was taking a shower after work. The water dripped from his body and his muscles glistened under the light. Musa turned, startled. "Madam, what are you doing here?" he shouted, trying to cover himself. Ruth's eyes went straight to what was between his legs. She opened her mouth in surprise and smiled. "Musa," she said firmly, stepping closer, "I want your big cucumber inside me." Musa froze, his mouth open as he stared at her. "Madam, this is not right," he stammered, but Ruth didn't let him finish. She dropped her robe to the floor, revealing her body. Then she moved closer and pressed her hands against his chest. "I don't care what's right or wrong. I need this. I need you." She silenced him with a kiss and took what she had been craving for so long. "Please hit the subscribe button. It means a lot." Ruth sat on the bed in her wedding dress. The party was over, and she was alone with James in their hotel room. She had been waiting for this night for so long. James walked in, loosening his tie. "What a beautiful day, huh?" he said, smiling. He took off his shirt and climbed into bed beside her. Ruth smiled nervously as James leaned over her. But before she could enjoy the moment, it was over. James rolled off her and grabbed his phone. "That was great," he said casually, scrolling through his phone. "Good night, Ruth." Ruth turned her face away, tears filling her eyes. She stayed silent, but her heart was breaking. This wasn't what she expected on her wedding night. Days turned into weeks, and Ruth's disappointment grew. James didn't seem to care about her feelings. He was always busy with his business or glued to his phone. One night, Ruth couldn't hold it in anymore. "James," she said, "we need to talk." "What about?" he asked without looking up from his phone. "About us," she said. "You don't touch me. You don't make me feel like your wife." James sighed and finally put his phone down. "Ruth, marriage isn't all about that. We're adults. Let's focus on more important things." "But I'm your wife, James," she said. "I need to feel wanted." "You need to manage," he said. "I'm doing my best." Ruth lay awake that night, tears streaming down her face. She felt lonely and unwanted. She loved James, but she couldn't ignore how empty she felt. Things didn't get better for Ruth. Night after night, James would roll over after checking his phone and fall asleep, leaving her feeling more and more alone. She had tried everything to fix the problem. She wore beautiful lingerie, made his favorite meals, and even tried to initiate intimacy. But James was either too busy or uninterested. One day, Ruth decided she couldn't keep this to herself anymore. She picked up her phone and called James's mother. She explained her pain and how James didn't care about her needs as his wife. "James is always on his phone," Ruth said, her voice shaking. "He doesn't have time for me. Even when we're in bed, it's like I'm invisible." But James's mother didn't seem to care. "Ruth," she said sharply, "you should be grateful you have a man like James. Do you know how many women would want to be in your place? Maybe you're the problem." "I'm not the problem," Ruth replied, her voice rising. "I've tried everything to make this marriage work, but he doesn't even notice me." "Ruth, don't be ridiculous," his mother snapped. "You're just being promiscuous, that's all. A good wife doesn't complain. Focus on your home and stop thinking about things that don't matter." Ruth's heart broke at those words. She had expected support, but instead, she was being blamed. When she tried talking to James's father, it was the same thing. "A man is busy with his work. You women always want too much," he said dismissively. After that, Ruth stopped trying to talk to James's parents. She realized they would never take her side. She felt trapped in a marriage where she was unhappy and no one seemed to care. At home, The atmosphere grew worse. Ruth stopped smiling. She barely spoke to James except when it was necessary. James didn't seem to notice her sadness, or if he did, he didn't care. He spent most of his time on his phone or working late, leaving Ruth alone in the big house. One day, Ruth's best friend, Anita, came to visit. They sat in the living room, drinking juice and catching up. Anita was always full of life, laughing and talking about her husband. "Ruth, let me tell you something," Anita said, leaning closer with a cheeky smile. "My husband, he's a king in bed. That man knows how to handle me." Ruth's eyes widened. "Really? Ah, you don't understand," Anita said, laughing. "His cucumber. It's big and long, Ruth. Every time I need it, he's ready for me. I don't even have to beg. He knows how to make me happy." Ruth forced a smile, but inside, her heart sank. Hearing Anita talk about her husband like that made her think about James and how different their marriage was. She felt a mix of jealousy and sadness. Why couldn't she have what Anita had? Why did she have to beg for something that should come naturally in a marriage? Later that night, Ruth couldn't stop thinking about what Anita had said. The words kept replaying in her mind. "Big and long, always ready for me." She sighed deeply, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts began to wander, and for the first time, she started considering what it would feel like to experience that kind of passion. The days went by, and Ruth's thoughts grew darker. She tried to push them away, but it was like a seed had been planted in her mind. She began to notice the small things that made her unhappy in her marriage. Every time James ignored her or brushed off her attempts to talk, she felt more and more tempted to find happiness elsewhere. One afternoon, as Ruth sat alone in the living room, her mind drifted to Musa. She remembered the way his muscles looked when he was working outside, the way he always greeted her with a warm smile. Her heart began to race as she thought about the moment in the bathroom when she had seen him naked. The image was burned into her memory, and she couldn't help but wonder what it would feel like to be with him. Ruth shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. "No," she told herself. "I can't think like that. I'm a married woman." But the loneliness and frustration in her heart didn't go away. Every day she felt more drawn to Musa, and every night she lay awake in bed, imagining what it would be like to feel wanted, desired, and satisfied. It was a quiet night, so James had left earlier in the day for a business trip, leaving Ruth alone in the big house. The silence was heavy, and Ruth couldn't stop her mind from wandering. Thoughts of Musa had been consuming her for weeks. She had tried to resist, but the temptation was too strong. Ruth stood in front of her mirror, wrapped in a towel. Her heart was racing. She didn't know what had come over her, but tonight felt different. She couldn't fight her feelings anymore. She walked out of her room and made her way to Musa's quarters. As she got closer, she heard the sound of running water. Musa was in the bathroom taking his evening shower. Ruth pushed open the slightly ajar door and stepped inside. Musa was under the shower, the water running down his muscular body. His back was turned, and he didn't notice her at first. Ruth's eyes immediately went to the thing she had been dreaming of for so long. She gasped softly, unable to look away. "Madam," Musa shouted when he turned and saw her standing there. He quickly tried to cover himself with his hands. "What are you doing here?" But Ruth didn't answer. She dropped her towel, her bare body now exposed. "Musa," she said firmly, stepping closer. "I want you. I want your big cucumber now." "Madam, this is wrong," Musa said, his voice shaking. "You are Ogre's wife. "I don't care," Ruth replied, her voice low but determined. "I've been dreaming about this for so long. Please, Musa, give me what I need." Before Musa could say anything else, Ruth moved closer and pressed her body against his. Her hands roamed over his chest, and she silenced his protests with a kiss. Musa's resistance crumbled as her touch ignited something deep inside him. That night, Ruth finally got what she'd been craving. Musa's big and long cucumber satisfied her in ways she hadn't felt in years. The passion was intense and raw, and Ruth felt truly alive for the first time in her marriage. Ruth sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the pregnancy test in her hand. Her hands were shaking, and her heart was pounding. The result was clear. She was pregnant. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Could this baby be Musa's? The thought made her stomach twist in fear. How could she hide this from James? What if the baby came out looking like Musa? Tears rolled down her cheeks as she thought about the consequences. She felt trapped and scared, but deep down, she knew she couldn't undo what had happened. After hours of thinking, Ruth made a decision. She didn't know how it would turn out, but she knew she had to protect herself.